The silence in my old house had become a physical presence after my husband Frank passed away. It wasn't a peaceful quiet. It was a heavy, echoing void that settled in the corners of rooms where he used to read the paper, and in the garage where the hum of his woodworking tools had fallen silent. For 45 years, that house had been a symphony of our life together. Now, it was just an empty concert hall. So when my daughter Brenda called with her proposition, a part of me that had been dormant with grief felt a flicker of hope. "Mom, it's just silly for you to be rattling around in that huge place all by yourself," she'd said, her voice dripping with a syrupy concern that I chose at the time to believe was genuine. "We have the guest suite downstairs. It has its own bathroom. You can sell the house, put the money away for a rainy day, and just relax. No more property taxes, no more worrying about the roof. Just come live with us." Her husband, Mark, got on the line to echo the sentiment. It sounded perfect, a soft landing at the end of a turbulent chapter. The move itself was a painful amputation. Every packed box felt like a piece of my history being sealed away. I sold the house to a young family, and the closing was bittersweet. I watched them, beaming with the same excitement Frank and I had felt all those years ago, and I prayed they would be as happy there as we had been. The proceeds from the sale were substantial. Frank had been a meticulous financial planner, and we'd owned the home outright for 2 decades. The money was wired to my private investment account, a nest egg Frank had always called my runaway fund, a joke from a time when I had nowhere I'd ever want to run to. I didn't mention the exact amount to Brenda. It felt private, unnecessary. I arrived at her pristine suburban home in a quiet Ohio cul-de-sac with 2 suitcases and a heart full of fragile optimism. The guest suite was lovely, just as she'd described, with tasteful gray walls and a view of the manicured lawn. The first week felt like a vacation. My granddaughter Lily would bring me her drawings, and I'd help her with her homework. I'd make my famous lasagna, and Mark would rave about it. I thought, this is it. This is my new life. I can do this. But beneath the surface of their welcome, I began to sense a subtle current of something else, something I couldn't quite name. It was in the way Brenda would slightly rearrange the spice rack after I cooked, or the quick, tight smile she'd give when I mentioned a story about her father. I dismissed it as the normal friction of adjusting to a new living arrangement. I was a guest, after all. I had to be accommodating. I had to be grateful. The transition from honored guest to permanent fixture happened gradually, then all at once. My attempts to contribute began to be viewed not as help, but as interference. One afternoon, I decided to do a few loads of laundry to take the burden off Brenda, who was always complaining about the mountain of clothes. I separated the whites and colors just as I'd taught her to do 30 years prior. When she came home from work, she didn't thank me. She held up one of Mark's polo shirts, her brow furrowed. "Mom, did you wash this? You have to use the cold water delicate cycle or it shrinks, and this isn't my brand of fabric softener. It smells different." The word hung in the air. Different. Wrong. I had contaminated her perfect, orderly world with my out-of-date methods. The next week, I offered to pick up groceries. I used my own money, of course, but when I returned, Brenda went through the bags with the critical eye of a customs inspector. "Oh, you got the organic milk. That's sweet, Mom, but it's $3 more. And we really only use the Dave's Killer bread. Lily won't eat this kind." She'd sigh, a long, weary exhalation that was meant to convey not anger, but a deep parental disappointment in my inability to keep up. The polite suggestions soon morphed into thinly veiled criticisms. My television in the guest suite was apparently too loud, even though I kept it at a volume where I had to strain to hear. The scent of the lavender sachet I kept in my drawer was a little overpowering. I started to feel like I was taking up too much space, breathing too much air. I spent more and more time in my room, reading books and scrolling through news on my tablet. I could hear their lives happening on the other side of the door. The rush of getting Lily to soccer practice, the clatter of dinner being made, the low murmur of their conversations after Lily was in bed. The financial comments became more frequent, tossed out casually but landing like stones. "Our electricity bill was $100 higher this month," Mark would announce at the dinner table. glancing at the ceiling in the general direction of my room. Property taxes are just brutal in this district, Brenda would lament, shaking her head. They never asked me for a dime, which was almost worse. It allowed them to build a narrative of their own magnanimity, of the great burden they were shouldering with such grace. I was a charity case. I began to feel the weight of every glass of water I drank, every watt of electricity I used. The kindness had curdled into a cloying, suffocating obligation, and I was choking on it. The dam of resentment finally broke on a rainy Tuesday in October. The dishwasher had been making a strange grinding noise for a week, and that morning it finally gave up, leaving a pool of sudsy water on the kitchen floor. Brenda was already stressed, late for a meeting at the marketing firm where she worked. She threw a towel down with a frustrated grunt. "This is just perfect! Another $1,000 expense we don't need right now." I stepped forward, my hands fluttering uselessly. "Oh dear, Brenda, let me call a repairman. I can cover it. It's no problem." It was an honest offer, a simple solution. But she turned on me, her face a mask of bitter fury. The politeness, the carefully constructed facade of the dutiful daughter crumbled to dust. "You'll cover it? With what money, Mom? It's easy to offer when you have no bills to pay. You have no idea what it costs to run a household, to have a mortgage, to pay for utilities and car insurance and braces for Lily." Her voice was rising, sharp and shrill. Mark stood by the counter, gripping his coffee mug, his eyes fixed on the puddle on the floor, as if it were the most fascinating thing in the world. "Brenda, that's not fair," I started, my own voice trembling. "I sold my house. I have savings." She cut me off with a cruel, barking laugh. "Savings? You mean the money you're hoarding while we pay for your food, your electricity, your everything? For 6 months you've been living here completely free. Do you have any idea how much that's costing us?" I felt the blood drain from my face. The injustice of it was a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. I had raised this woman. I had paid for her braces, her college education, her first car. I had co-signed the loan for this very house she was standing in. And now, all of that was erased. "I never wanted to be a burden," I whispered, the words tasting like ash. Brenda's eyes narrowed, and she delivered the final, fatal shot. "A burden? Mom, let's be honest. You're not a burden. You're a freeloader." The word echoed in the sudden, ringing silence of the kitchen. Freeloader. It was so ugly, so transactional. It stripped our entire relationship of love and left only a cold, bitter ledger of debits and credits. I looked at Mark, pleading with my eyes for him to say something, to defend me, to be the decent man I thought he was. He just took a slow sip of his coffee and refused to meet my gaze. In that moment, something inside me didn't break. It hardened. It turned from a soft, grieving heart into a small, sharp piece of granite. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply turned, walked back to my room, and closed the door with a quiet, definitive click. The war had been declared, and I had just been handed my weapon. My grief for my husband was suddenly eclipsed by a new, colder grief for the daughter I thought I had. The woman in the kitchen was a stranger, her heart a place I no longer recognized. For 2 days, I barely left my room. I told them I wasn't feeling well, a lie they readily accepted, probably with some relief. They saw a defeated old woman licking her wounds. They were wrong. I was not licking wounds. I was sharpening knives. The first thing I did was open my laptop and log into my investment portfolio. The numbers on the screen glowed back at me, a silent testament to Frank's foresight and my own quiet discipline. It was a formidable sum, far more than Brenda and Mark, with their conspicuous consumption and complaints about a $1,000 dishwasher, could ever imagine. The runaway fund was now a war chest. My next call was to my financial advisor, a shrewd woman named Cynthia, whom I'd trusted for years. "Cynthia," I said, my voice low but steady, "I need to liquidate a portion of my portfolio and have it transferred to my checking account. I'm thinking of a cash purchase in the near future." There was a pause on the other end. "A large purchase, Helen?" "Very," I replied, a small, cold smile touching my lips for the first time in days. My web browsing history, which had been filled with book clubs and news sites, now looked very different. Realtor.com, Zillow, listings for my daughter's very own zip code. And there it was. The house directly next door to Brenda and Mark's, the Henderson place. A lovely two-story colonial, slightly larger than theirs, with a beautiful mature oak tree in the front yard. The Hendersons were retiring to Florida, and the house had just gone on the market. I stared at the pictures online, the spacious kitchen with granite countertops, the sunroom overlooking the backyard, the hardwood floors. It was perfect, a fortress from which I could watch my new life bloom. I made another call, this time to the listing agent, a man named Gary. I introduced myself and stated my intentions with a clarity that surprised even me. "I'd like to see the house at 124 Chestnut Lane tomorrow," I said. "And Mr. Peterson, you should know, I will be a cash buyer. I'm prepared to make a full-price offer with no contingencies if the property is as advertised." Gary, who had probably been expecting a drawn-out negotiation, was audibly taken aback. "Well, Miss Miller, that's fantastic. I'll arrange it for noon." I spent the rest of the evening in my room, not as a recluse but as an architect, quietly, meticulously drawing up the blueprints for my own liberation. The "For Sale" sign went up in the Hendersons' front yard the next day. It was a handsome sign, a bright red beacon of my impending freedom. Brenda noticed it immediately, of course. "Looks like the Hendersons are finally moving," she commented at dinner that night, her voice filled with neighborhood gossip. "I hope someone nice moves in. Can you imagine if we got a family with a bunch of loud teenagers? Or barking dogs?" She looked at me, expecting me to share in her suburban anxiety. I just gave a non-committal shrug and took a bite of the salad she'd prepared. No dressing, as she'd informed me the ranch I preferred had too much sodium. For the next week, I played the part of the meek, chastened mother. I was quiet, unobtrusive, and spent most of my time in my room. From my window, I watched the parade of potential buyers come and go. I saw Gary, the realtor, lead them through the front door, and I felt a secret thrill every time they left without looking overly enthusiastic. My own tour of the house had been perfect. It was solid, well-maintained, and filled with light. I had made my offer on the spot, and after a brief call to the Hendersons in Florida, Gary had called me back to confirm their acceptance. The gears were in motion, all without Brenda or Mark having the slightest clue. The closing was scheduled for the following Friday. I arranged for a car service to pick me up, telling Brenda I had a routine doctor's appointment across town. The signing was a blur of paperwork, but the feeling was one of absolute clarity. When the keys were placed in my hand, they felt heavier than the deed to my old house. They felt like the keys to my own life. That afternoon, when I returned, I saw Gary out front of the Henderson place, hammering a new sign into the lawn. This one was different. It had a bold red stripe across the top with a single glorious word, "Sold." I waited until Mark and Brenda were both home from work, sitting in their living room. I walked in, holding the new set of keys in my hand, letting them jingle ever so slightly. "Well, I have some news about your new neighbor," I said, my voice calm and even. Brenda looked up from her phone. "Oh? Did you hear something? Who bought it?" I let the silence hang for a moment, savoring it. I then held up the keys. "I did," I said. "Paid cash this afternoon. I suppose we'll be seeing a lot more of each other." The look on their faces was a masterpiece of disbelief. Brenda's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Mark's face went pale. The air in the room crackled with the sudden, shocking transfer of power. I was no longer the freeloader in the basement. I was the landowner next door. My moving day was a spectacle of understated triumph. I hired a local company, and the big white truck pulled up to Brenda and Mark's house at precisely 9 a.m. on a Saturday. I had very little to move, just my suitcases, a few boxes of personal effects, and the new queen-sized bed I had ordered, which was being delivered directly to my new address. I stood on the driveway, directing the two young, brawny movers. "Just the boxes from the downstairs suite, please. Everything is already packed." Brenda came to the door, her robe pulled tight around her, a look of profound confusion on her face, as if she were still trying to process a dream. "Mom, what is all this?" she asked, her voice a hushed whisper. I'm moving, dear, I said brightly, pointing with a flourish. Just over there. Try to keep up. The movers carried my boxes out of her house, across the small strip of lawn that separated our properties, and through the front door of my house. It was a short, comical procession of my meager belongings, a pilgrimage from dependence to sovereignty. I saw the curtains twitch in Brenda and Mark's living room window. They were watching, of course. They watched as the new bed was delivered. They watched as I signed for a package containing a brand new Keurig coffee machine. They watched as I stood on my new front porch, a true homeowner, and thanked the movers, tipping them generously. The inside of my house was a blank canvas. Empty rooms echoed with possibility. I walked through the sunroom, imagining a comfortable armchair and a small table for my books and tea. I stood in the center of the kitchen, which was twice the size of Brenda's, and pictured myself cooking whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted, using any damn spice I pleased. There was no one to tell me I was using the wrong brand of anything. There was no one to sigh about the utility bills. The silence in this house was different from the silence in my old one. It wasn't a void left by loss. It was a peaceful, expansive quiet, filled with the promise of my own choices. Later that afternoon, I sat on my new front steps with a bottle of cold water, watching the neighborhood kids ride their bikes. I could see Brenda's front door. For the first time in months, I felt no anxiety about what was happening on the other side of it. I was separate. I was safe. I was home. For the next few days, I reveled in my newfound solitude. I bought new furniture, paying the delivery men to assemble it all. I bought beautiful, fluffy towels that weren't gray. I bought a ridiculously expensive espresso machine and a brand of coffee beans from a local roaster that smelled like heaven. I was building a life from scratch, and every choice was mine alone. But there was one final piece of business to attend to. One last transaction to close out the books on my old life. On the third evening in my new house, I sat down at the antique writing desk I'd placed in the sunroom. I opened my laptop and created a new document. At the top, in a bold, professional font, I typed the word invoice. I addressed it to Mrs. Brenda Davies, 122 Chestnut Lane. The line items took me over an hour to compile. I didn't just list things, I relived them. I wanted to quantify the unquantifiable, to put a price on a mother's love, since she had so carelessly put a price on her hospitality. The list was long and detailed. It began, room and board, ages 0, 18, 6,570 days. I didn't assign a dollar value to that one. I just marked it paid in full. But then I got specific. Maternity and delivery costs, St. Jude's Hospital, $7,500. Orthodontic treatment, braces, headgear, and retainers, $6,200. Emergency room visit, broken arm, age 9, including ice cream bribe, $1,850. I added line items for piano lessons, summer camps, and 1,000 gallons of gasoline for taxiing her to and from friends' houses and soccer practice. I added a section for her college years. Tuition and fees, Ohio State University, in-state, $44,076. Books and supplies, approx. $5,000. Co-signing of student loans, assuming risk, priceless. The final and most important section was titled Emotional Labor. Underneath I listed things like bedtime stories read, approx. 2,000. Fevers monitored and foreheads cooled, innumerable. Shoulders cried on, boy trouble, bad grades, friend drama, service rendered. I didn't put a price on these either. At the very bottom of the page, I wrote a final total for the quantifiable expenses, a number that ran well into 6 figures. Then I added a simple final line. Balance due, forgiven. Consider this my final contribution to your household. Please note, future hospitality services are no longer available. I printed the document on high-quality cream-colored paper, folded it neatly, and sealed it in a matching envelope. The next morning, I walked to my new mailbox, placed the letter inside, and raised the red flag. It was a journey of less than 50 feet, but it felt like the final step across a vast continent, from a past I had to endure to a future I was finally in control of. I saw the mail truck come and go the next day from my sunroom window. I watched as Brenda walked out to her mailbox in her work clothes, a stack of bills and catalogs in her hand. She flipped through them, and I saw her pause when she got to the cream-colored envelope. She frowned, likely confused by the formal, high-quality stationery. She opened it right there on her lawn. I couldn't see her face clearly, but I saw her posture change. Her shoulders slumped. She stood frozen for what must have been 5 minutes, reading and rereading the single sheet of paper. She didn't storm over to my house. She didn't scream or yell. She simply turned and walked slowly back inside, the invoice still in her hand. A profound and profoundly satisfying silence followed. For days, there was no contact. I saw her and Mark leaving for work, bringing in groceries, their movements seeming more subdued, almost hesitant. They would sometimes glance at my house, their expressions unreadable from this distance. My life, in contrast, blossomed. I joined a gardening club. I hosted a book club meeting in my new living room. I found a local volunteer group and started reading to children at the public library twice a week, my heart filling with a joy that had nothing to do with obligation. One Saturday morning, as I was trimming my rose bushes, Lily came wandering across the lawn. She was holding a drawing. "Hi, Grandma," she said quietly. "This is for you." It was a picture of 2 houses, side by side, with a smiling stick figure in front of each one. "It's us, we're neighbors," she explained. "Thank you, sweetie. It's beautiful," I said, my voice thick with emotion. I looked up and saw Brenda standing on her porch watching us. There was no anger in her face anymore, just a deep, weary sadness. She gave me a small, hesitant wave. I paused, then slowly I waved back. There was no invoice I could send for a broken heart, and no payment that could fix it. She had taught me a brutal lesson about the cost of things. But in my beautiful new house, surrounded by a life of my own making, I had finally learned the value of myself, and that I knew was priceless.